When he screamed at me in front of the entire boardroom, the world seemed to stop spinning. His face was red with rage, his finger pointing at me like I was nothing more than dirt beneath his expensive Italian shoes. In that moment, I didn't just lose all respect for our CEO, I made a silent vow that would change everything. He thought I was nobody, just another disposable employee he could humiliate without consequence. He had no idea he'd just awakened something dangerous in me, something that had been dormant for far too long. My name is Rebecca Moore, and at 35, I thought I'd finally made it. Growing up in a small Colorado town where the biggest employer was a dying coal mine, I'd clawed my way through state college on scholarships and sheer determination. Every late night studying, every double shift at the diner, every snide comment about being too ambitious for a girl from nowhere, it all led me here, to the gleaming towers of Chicago's Loop District, to my corner cubicle at Ardent Dynamics, as head of marketing strategy. I managed a team of 12 brilliant minds in one of the most competitive tech companies in the Midwest. Our office occupied the 47th floor of a glass monolith that scraped the clouds. All chrome fixtures and exposed brick walls that screamed innovation to visiting investors. But beneath the ping-pong tables and kombucha on tap, Ardent Dynamics harbored a toxic secret that everyone knew but no one dared speak aloud. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as I arrived at 7 a.m. that Monday, an hour before most of my team. The office smelled of stale coffee and the ghost of someone's microwaved fish from Friday. I'd developed a routine: arrive early, claim the good conference room for my team's morning stand-up, and prepare my armor for another day in Victor Langston's kingdom. Victor. Even thinking his name made my shoulders tense. Our CEO was a Harvard MBA who never let anyone forget it, a man who wore his success like a weapon. He'd built Ardent Dynamics from a startup to a billion-dollar enterprise in just 8 years. And somewhere along the way, he'd convinced himself that this achievement gave him the right to treat people like disposable assets on a balance sheet. The printer wheezed and clicked as it spat out my presentation slides for the quarterly review. 23 pages of metrics, projections, and strategic initiatives that my team had spent 3 weeks perfecting. We'd landed 2 major clients last quarter, increased brand engagement by 34%, and our campaign for the new AI assistant had gone viral on social media. By any measure, we were killing it. But success meant nothing in Victor's world if it didn't come with complete submission. I watched my team trickle in, Sarah with her perpetual cup of green tea, Marcus already on his 3rd espresso, Jennifer looking exhausted from another all-nighter. They were good people, talented people, people who deserved better than the constant fear that permeated these halls. We all walked on eggshells, speaking in hushed tones near the executive suite, crafting emails with the careful precision of bomb technicians. The dysfunction had become normalized. We'd learned to navigate Victor's moods like sailors reading storm clouds. When his assistant, Patricia, wore bright colors, it meant he was in a decent mood. When she dressed in black or gray, we knew to keep our heads down. Today, she wore charcoal. Morning stand-up in 5, I announced to my team, forcing brightness into my voice. They gathered their laptops and notebooks with the resigned efficiency of soldiers preparing for battle. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see other departments doing the same dance, the morning ritual of corporate survival. The coffee maker gurgled, producing its bitter brew that we all pretended was drinkable. Someone had left a motivational poster crooked on the wall. Excellence is not an accident. I straightened it, wondering if whoever chose it understood the irony. In this place, excellence wasn't rewarded. It was expected, demanded, and never quite good enough. My phone buzzed, an email from Victor's assistant. CEO requests your presence in the main conference room at 10 a.m. for quarterly review. Full presentation required. 3 hours. 3 hours until I had to stand before him and justify my team's existence, our budgets, our very right to occupy this expensive Chicago real estate. I'd done this dance 4 times before, each one more grueling than the last. But this time felt different. There was something in the air, a tension that made my skin prickle with premonition. Looking back now, I should have trusted that instinct, should have called in sick, should have run for the elevators and never looked back. But I didn't. Because despite everything, I still believed that hard work and results mattered, that professionalism could triumph over petty tyranny. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The main conference room was a fishbowl of glass and steel, designed to intimidate. 23 executives sat around the massive oak table, their faces carefully neutral masks. Victor Langston commanded the head of the table like a king holding court. His Armani suit impeccable, his steel gray hair perfectly coiffed. At 52, he had the look of a man who'd never been told no. I entered with my laptop and stack of reports, feeling every pair of eyes track my movement. The air conditioning was cranked too high. Typical Victor, he liked people uncomfortable, off balance. I took my designated spot halfway down the table, between the CFO and the head of product development. More. Victor acknowledged me with a curt nod, not looking up from his phone. Let's see if marketing can justify its bloated budget this quarter. I stood, pulling up my presentation on the main screen. My hands were steady, my voice clear as I began walking through our achievements. The numbers were solid. The data was irrefutable. For 15 minutes, I presented flawlessly, fielding questions from other executives with practiced ease. Then I reached slide 17. As you can see, our customer acquisition cost decreased by 12% while... Stop. Victor's voice cut through the room like a blade. He was staring at the screen, his jaw clenching and unclenching. What the hell is that number? I followed his gaze. The ROI figure for our latest campaign showed 2x instead of 3.7x, a typo that Sarah had supposedly fixed last night. My stomach dropped. That appears to be a typographical error. Mr. Langston, the actual ROI is... I don't give a damn what the actual number is. He slammed his palm on the table, making several people jump. His face was turning that dangerous shade of red I'd seen before, but never directed at me. This is what you bring to my boardroom, this amateur hour garbage? Sir, it's a minor error that doesn't affect... Minor? He stood up, all 6 feet 3 inches of him towering over the room. Do you know what happens when we present minor errors to investors? Do you have any concept of what credibility means in this industry? The room had gone morgue silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Mr. Langston, my team's performance speaks for itself. One typo doesn't. Your team... He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your team is a bunch of overpaid children playing with finger paints and calling it strategy. And you... He pointed at me, his fingers shaking with rage. You're supposed to be their leader. You can't even proofread a simple presentation? My face burned. 22 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, but no one would meet my gaze directly. They were all looking slightly past me, as if I'd already ceased to exist. Are you incompetent, or just lazy? Victor continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that was somehow worse than the shouting. Because I'm starting to think you're both... How much do we pay you? More? 130,000? For what? So you can waste my time with your incompetence? I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off. You're nothing but a diversity hire with a community college vocabulary trying to play in the big leagues. I could replace you with an intern tomorrow and probably get better results. Hell, my nephew's kid could do your job better. And he's still in high school. The words hit like physical blows. Diversity hire, community college, nothing. You stand there in your bargain basement suit, pretending you belong here. But we both know the truth, don't you? You're just a small-town nobody who got lucky. And luck? More. Always runs out. My hands were trembling now, but not from fear. Something cold and sharp was crystallizing in my chest, replacing the humiliation with something far more dangerous. Is that all, Mr. Langston? My voice came out steady, almost serene. He seemed taken aback by my composure. Get out of my sight and fix that pathetic presentation before you dare show your face in this room again. I gathered my materials with deliberate slowness, refusing to scurry away like a scolded child. As I reached the door, I turned back to face him. You're right about one thing, Mr. Langston. I am from a small town. We learn different lessons there. Lessons about what happens when powerful men think they're untouchable. His eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? More? No, sir, just an observation. I walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor with metronomic precision. Behind me, I heard him bark at the next presenter. But his voice sounded different now, uncertain, maybe even worried. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. My eyes were dry, clear, focused. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken or defeated. She was something else entirely. Something Victor Langston had just made the fatal mistake of creating. You just declared war on the wrong person, I whispered to my reflection. And you don't even know it yet. The game had begun. That night, I sat in my Lincoln Park apartment, staring at the Chicago skyline through rain-streaked windows. The city lights blurred into abstract patterns, like the thoughts swirling in my mind. On the coffee table, a glass of wine sat untouched, its surface perfectly still while everything inside me raged. Diversity higher. The words echoed in my skull like a broken record. Victor didn't know about the nights I'd spent sleeping in my car during college because I couldn't afford both rent and textbooks. He didn't know about my father's death when I was 16, leaving my mother and me with nothing but debt and determination. He didn't know about the scholarship essay I'd rewritten 47 times, pouring my soul onto paper for a chance at something better. All he saw was a target. My phone had been silent all day. Not a single message from my team. No words of support from fellow executives. I understood. In ardent dynamics, aligning yourself with Victor's victim was career suicide. They'd all witnessed my public execution and made the only choice that guaranteed their survival. Pretend it never happened. But their silence told me something valuable. I wasn't the only one who hated him. I pulled out my laptop and opened a document I'd created months ago, but never had the courage to fill. Victor Langston sat at the top of an otherwise blank page. Now, I began typing. Patterns of abuse. Public humiliation tactics. The assistant who quit without notice last year, the CFO who'd transferred to the Seattle office after a similar boardroom incident, the junior developer who'd filed an HR complaint that mysteriously disappeared. The memories came flooding back, moments I'd witnessed but trained myself to forget. Victor berating a pregnant employee until she cried. Victor throwing a laptop across the room when a presentation displeased him. Victor making his assistant buy his wife's anniversary gift, then taking credit for the thoughtfulness. Each incident alone might be dismissed as a bad day, stress, the pressure of running a billion-dollar company. But together, they painted a picture of systematic cruelty. A man who fed on others' humiliation like a vampire feeds on blood. I remembered something my grandmother used to say back in Colorado. When a rattlesnake bites you, you don't get mad at the snake. It's just doing what snakes do. But you make damn sure it never bites anyone else. Victor thought he was a king. But he was just a snake in an expensive suit. And I was about to become his mongoose. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the hurt one last time. The burning shame. The incredulous faces of my colleagues. The way my carefully built professional persona had been stripped away in minutes. Then I locked it all away in a box deep inside my chest. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford now. What I needed was clarity, patience, and the kind of cold calculation that Victor himself had taught me through his example. I thought about Rebecca Moore, the eager young woman who'd arrived in Chicago 7 years ago with nothing but ambition and hope. She'd believed that merit mattered, that hard work would be recognized, that respect was earned through achievement. That woman had died in the conference room today. The woman born from her ashes was different. She understood that in Victor's world, respect wasn't earned, it was taken. Power wasn't given, it was seized. And revenge. Well, revenge was a dish best served with a side of complete destruction. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, my team member. Are you okay? I stared at the message for a long moment. Sweet Sarah, brave enough to reach out but careful enough to do it after hours, from her personal phone, leaving no corporate digital trail. She was smart, maybe smart enough to help when the time came. I'm fine, I replied. See you tomorrow. But I wouldn't be seeing her tomorrow, not the same me anyway. Tomorrow, I would walk into Ardent Dynamics wearing my armor of professionalism, my mask of compliance. I would smile at Victor if we passed in the hall. I would apologize for the typo with just the right amount of contrition. I would play the role of the chastened employee who'd learned her lesson. And while I played that role, I would begin the slow, methodical process of destroying everything Victor Langston held dear. He thought I was nobody. He was about to learn that nobody can be the most dangerous somebody of all, because nobody has nothing left to lose. Nobody has no reputation to protect. Nobody can move through the shadows of corporate hierarchy unseen, collecting secrets like shells on a beach. The rain had stopped. Through the clearing clouds, a full moon emerged, casting silver light across the city. It felt like an omen, a sign that the tides were about to turn. I opened a new browser window in incognito mode and began my research. Victor Langston had made one crucial error in his decades of corporate tyranny. He'd assumed his victims would always remain victims. He'd never considered that one day he might create a monster. That day had come, and I was just getting started. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I arrived early, stayed late, and delivered flawless work with a submissive smile. To anyone watching, Rebecca Moore had been successfully broken and rebuilt in Victor's image, another corporate drone who'd learned her place. But while I played the perfect employee by day, my nights belonged to a different agenda. It started with reconnaissance. Victor was a creature of habit, and habits are vulnerabilities. Every Tuesday, he had lunch at the same steakhouse with potential investors. Every Thursday, he left early for his golf club, where deals were made on the back nine. His assistant Patricia handled his personal emails from her computer, a security violation that IT mysteriously never addressed. I began documenting everything in an encrypted folder on my personal laptop. Screenshots of suspicious expense reports, photos of him leaving the office with a woman who wasn't his wife, recording of his verbal abuse during meetings. Illinois was a one-party consent state, making my phone recordings perfectly legal. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Thomas Kumar from IT support. He approached me one evening when the office was nearly empty, fidgeting with his badge. "Ms. Moore," he said quietly, glancing around nervously. "About what happened in the boardroom last month. Ancient history. Thomas." I kept my voice neutral, continuing to pack my bag. "Is it?" He moved closer, lowering his voice to barely a whisper. "Because I've been asked to do things that aren't ethical." I stopped packing and looked at him directly. Thomas was young, maybe 26, with the earnest face of someone who still believed in right and wrong. "What kind of things?" "Deleting emails, altering server logs, making certain financial documents disappear from the backup systems." His hands were shaking. "I kept copies of everything. I don't know why. I knew someday someone would need proof." My heart raced, but I kept my expression calm. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the first person who stood up to him and survived. And because..." He pulled out a flash drive. "I can't do this anymore. I'm putting in my notice tomorrow, moving back to Seattle. But someone should have this." I palmed the drive smoothly. "I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas, but good luck in Seattle." He smiled sadly. "Good luck to you too, Ms. Moore. You're going to need it." That night, I reviewed Thomas's files with growing excitement. He'd documented 3 years of financial irregularities, including a particularly damning series of transactions involving a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Victor had been skimming from client accounts, small amounts that added up to millions over time. But I needed more than one source. That's when I remembered Margaret Chen from accounting. who transferred to our Phoenix office last year after a personality conflict with Victor. A few carefully worded emails later, and she agreed to a phone call. "He destroyed my career here," she said, her voice bitter even through the phone. 20 years of spotless work, and he painted me as incompetent because I questioned his numbers. What numbers? The Prometheus deal, the one that made him a legend in the industry. The profits were inflated by 40%. He had me alter the books. Then when I protested, he made my life hell until I had no choice but to transfer. "Do you have proof?" A long pause. "I might. But Rebecca, if I help you, I need guaranteed anonymity. I have 2 kids in college. I can't afford to lose this job." "You have my word." Within a week, I had a network of 6 former and current employees, all nursing wounds from Victor's reign of terror. We met in a dingy bar in Chinatown, far from the Loop's prying eyes. There was Marcus from legal, who'd been forced to cover up a sexual harassment complaint, Jennifer from HR, who had files on 12 employees who'd left under suspicious circumstances, David from sales, who knew about kickbacks from vendors that went directly to Victor's personal accounts. "We're not doing anything illegal," I emphasized, looking at each of their faces in the dim light. "We're simply compiling truth. What happens to that truth? Well, that's not our responsibility." Jennifer laughed bitterly. "You're going to destroy him, aren't you?" I sipped my beer slowly. "I'm going to give him exactly what he deserves. No more, no less." The plan was simple in its elegance. We wouldn't leak to the press, too unreliable, too easy to spin. We wouldn't go to law enforcement, Victor had connections there. Instead, we'd go directly to the one group Victor couldn't charm, intimidate, or buy: the Board of Directors Audit Committee, particularly its chairman, Robert Hawthorne, a man known for his intolerance of financial misconduct. But timing was everything. The annual shareholder meeting was in 6 weeks. If the information surfaced just before the meeting, when the board was under maximum scrutiny, Victor wouldn't have time to maneuver his way out. As I walked home that night through the Chicago streets, I felt the pieces clicking into place like a complex puzzle. Victor Langston thought he was untouchable, protected by his success, his connections, his reputation. He was about to learn what happens when you create enemies who have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The nobody he'd humiliated was about to become his worst nightmare. The hunter had become the hunted, and he didn't even know it yet. The first sign that Victor sensed danger came during the Monday morning all-hands meeting. His eyes swept the room differently now, lingering on faces, searching for something he couldn't quite name. When his gaze found mine, I offered him my practiced smile, submissive, harmless, broken. He looked away, but not before I caught a flicker of uncertainty. "Someone in this company is leaking information," he announced, his voice cutting through the usual morning chatter. "I want to be very clear. When I find out who it is, and I will find out, that person won't just be fired. I'll ensure they never work in this industry again." A chill ran through the room. I kept my expression neutral, even as Jennifer from HR caught my eye for a split second before looking away. We'd prepared for this. We knew he'd sense the walls closing in before he could see them. That afternoon, paranoia transformed Ardent Dynamics into a prison. Security protocols were tightened, email monitoring increased. Victor hired an external firm to conduct random audits of our computers. 2 employees were escorted out for performance issues that everyone knew were fishing expeditions. Marcus from legal was one of them. I watched from my office as security packed his desk, my stomach churning. Marcus had 3 kids and a mortgage. But when he passed my door, being let out like a criminal, he gave me the slightest nod. The message was clear: stay the course. "Rebecca." Patricia's voice made me jump. Victor's assistant stood in my doorway, her face unreadable. "Mr. Langston wants to see you." The walk to his office felt like approaching a guillotine. Victor sat behind his massive desk, backlit by floor-to-ceiling windows that made him look like a silhouette against the Chicago skyline. "Sit," he commanded. I sat. You've been very quiet lately, he said, studying me like a specimen. Very compliant. I learned my lesson, Mr. Langston. I'm focused on my work. Are you? He stood, walking around the desk to tower over me. Because someone is trying to undermine me, Rebecca, someone who thinks they're clever, someone who might have been motivated by recent events. My heart hammered, but I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. I let my eyes water slightly, my voice trembling just enough. Mr. Langston, I would never. After what happened, I just want to keep my job. I have student loans, rent. I can't afford to lose this position. He studied me for a long moment. Then, seemingly satisfied with my performance, he returned to his desk. Double your team's output this quarter. I want daily reports on my desk by 8 a.m. Any mistakes, any delays, and you're gone. Understood? Yes, sir. As I left his office, I allowed myself a small smile. He'd just made a critical error. Demanding daily reports meant I'd have even more access to company data, more opportunities to document his paranoid descent. Over the next 2 weeks, Victor's hunt for the mole became an obsession. He installed cameras in the break rooms. He had IT track everyone's keystrokes. He even hired a private investigator to follow certain employees after hours, including me. I noticed the tail on a Tuesday evening, a gray sedan that made too many of the same turns. Instead of panicking, I led them on the world's most boring surveillance operation: grocery store, gym, home, Netflix. Repeat. Meanwhile, my real communications happened through encrypted apps on a burner phone I kept in a tampon box, the one place no male investigator would ever check. The pressure was breaking our alliance. David from sales developed a stress rash. Jennifer started having panic attacks. During one of our secret meetings, Thomas's replacement in IT, a young woman named Ashley who joined our cause, broke down crying. He's going to find out, she sobbed. He always wins. No, I said firmly, looking at each of their terrified faces. He doesn't always win. He just hasn't lost yet. There's a difference. But doubt was creeping in. 3 weeks until the shareholder meeting, and Robert Hawthorne hadn't responded to our anonymous tip. What if Victor's influence extended further than we thought? What if we were just small-town nobodies playing at corporate espionage? Then Victor made his second critical error. In his paranoia, he'd forgotten about Patricia, his loyal assistant who'd worked for him for 5 years, who knew where all the bodies were buried. The woman he'd screamed at once too often, calling her incompetent in front of the entire executive team just because his coffee was cold. She came to me on a Thursday night, finding me in the parking garage after everyone else had left. I know it's you, she said quietly. The resistance. I know you're behind it. I said nothing. Waiting. She pulled out a keycard. This accesses Victor's private office files, the ones he thinks nobody knows about. She pressed it into my hand. He's at his golf club until 10 tonight. You have 3 hours. Patricia, why? Because 20 years ago, I was you, young, ambitious, full of hope, and men like Victor crushed that hope day by day, year by year, until I became invisible, just furniture in his office. Her eyes blazed with long-suppressed rage. I can't fight him, but you can end him. As she walked away, I realized Victor's greatest weakness wasn't his financial crimes or his affairs or his abuse. It was his inability to see the people he'd hurt as anything more than casualties of his success. He'd created an army of the wounded, and now we were ready for war. Victor's private files were a goldmine of corruption. Hidden behind false folders labeled personal tax documents lay the real evidence: contracts with phantom vendors, offshore account statements, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation where he explicitly discussed defrauding the Prometheus investors with his personal lawyer. I had 3 hours in his office, my hands shaking as I photographed each document with my burner phone. The building was eerily quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner several floors below. Every shadow made me jump. Every ding of the elevator sent my heart racing. But the smoking gun wasn't in his financial crimes. It was in a folder simply labeled insurance. Inside were photographs and documents Victor had collected on board members, competitors, even government officials. Blackmail material. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance, this was criminal conspiracy at the highest level. One photo showed Robert Hawthorne himself at what appeared to be a very compromising party in Las Vegas. That's why Hawthorne hadn't responded. Victor owned him too. I sat back in Victor's leather chair, the weight of this discovery crushing. We'd been playing checkers while Victor played chess. But then I noticed something else. A draft email on his computer, scheduled to send tomorrow morning to the entire board. Victor was planning to announce a major acquisition, using the fraudulent Prometheus funds as capital. If this went through, he'd be untouchable. His crimes buried under the success of a new mega deal. The shareholder meeting was 2 weeks away. We couldn't wait. I made a decision that changed everything. Instead of taking this to the compromised board, I would go nuclear, the SEC, the FBI, the Wall Street Journal, everyone, all at once, on the same day. A coordinated strike that would hit before Victor could mobilize his defensive network. I spent the next week organizing everything into packages, USB drives with the evidence, detailed timelines, expert analysis from a forensic accountant Jennifer had connected me with. Each package was identical, irrefutable, and devastating. The team was falling apart from stress. David had already submitted his resignation, too terrified to continue. Ashley was barely sleeping, jumping at every phone call. Even I was showing cracks, dark circles under my eyes, hands that trembled when I held my coffee cup. Victor noticed. "You look tired, Rebecca," he said during a meeting, his tone almost gleeful. "Perhaps this job is too much for you after all." "Just working hard to meet your expectations, Mr. Langston," I replied, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Good. Because I'd hate to have to replace you, again." The threat was clear. He was toying with me, enjoying what he perceived as my slow breakdown. He had no idea that my exhaustion came not from fear, but from preparation for his execution. 5 days before the strike, Patricia came to me again, this time panicked. "He knows," she whispered urgently. "Not everything, but he knows something big is coming. He's moving money, destroying documents. If you're going to act, it has to be now." But we weren't ready. The journalist contact at the Wall Street Journal needed another source for corroboration. The FBI wanted more documentation on the interstate fraud aspects. Everything was balanced on a knife's edge. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at my laptop screen. The send button seemed to pulse. Waiting. One click would release everything we had to every authority, every media outlet on my list. But if we struck too early, if we missed even one crucial piece, Victor might survive. Wounded, perhaps, but alive enough to destroy us all. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you're clever, but you're just another ant trying to topple a mountain. Stop now, and I might let you resign quietly. Continue. And I'll bury you so deep they'll need archaeology to find your career. V.L." Victor Langston had just made his fatal error. He'd threatened me directly, in writing. He'd given me the last piece of evidence I needed, proof of intimidation and obstruction. I screenshot the message, added it to the packages, and opened my laptop. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. By morning, Victor's world would be in flames. My finger hovered over the send button as I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation in the boardroom, the sleepless nights, the fear in my colleagues' eyes, the decades of abuse Victor had inflicted on everyone around him. "You called me nobody," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see how a nobody destroys an empire." I clicked send. 37 emails flew into the digital night, each one a precision missile aimed at the heart of Victor Langston's carefully constructed kingdom. The Wall Street Journal, the SEC, the FBI, the Illinois Attorney General, every major shareholder, every competitor who'd want to feast on Ardent's corpse. As the scent confirmations popped up one by one, I felt a strange calm descend. The die was cast. Tomorrow, Victor would wake up to find his fortress crumbling, his secrets exposed, his power evaporating like morning mist. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same one I'd left untouched the night he'd humiliated me, and raised it to the Chicago skyline. "Checkmate," I said, and for the first time in 2 months, I smiled genuinely. The king was about to fall. Friday morning arrived with a storm, both literal and metaphorical. Rain lashed against the windows of Ardent Dynamics as I arrived at 7 a.m., my usual time. The office was quiet, normal, the calm before devastation. At 8:17 a.m., it began. Victor burst out of his office, his face purple with rage, phone pressed to his ear. Through the glass walls, I could see him gesticulating wildly, screaming at whoever was on the other end. Then another call came in on his desk phone, then another on his second cell. Patricia was frantically trying to manage the flood, her face pale as death. By 9 a.m., the Wall Street Journal's article was live. Tech giant CEO accused of massive fraud, FBI investigating. The office erupted. Phones rang incessantly. Employees clustered around computers, reading with shocked expressions. Our stock price began its death spiral, dropping 18% in the first hour of trading. I maintained my routine, calmly working at my desk, occasionally glancing up with practiced concern. When Sarah asked if I'd seen the news, I feigned surprise perfectly. "This can't be true," I said, letting the right amount of disbelief color my voice. "Mr. Langston would never." At 10:30 a.m., the FBI arrived. 6 agents in dark suits walked through our glass doors like harbingers of justice. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and cold eyes, presented papers to Patricia. Victor tried to intercept them, his usual bombast replaced with something I'd never seen before: fear. "This is a mistake," he kept repeating. "I want my lawyer. You don't understand who you're dealing with." "Mr. Langston," the lead agent said calmly, "we're executing a warrant for your computers and files. I suggest you step aside." He turned to the gathered employees, searching faces desperately, looking for the traitor. When his eyes found mine, I held his gaze steadily, my expression nothing but professional concern for my leader's plight. "Someone did this," he snarled. "Someone in this room betrayed me." The agent placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Langston, we need you to come with us for questioning." "You can't." He stopped, his bravado finally cracking. "I built this company. I am this company." "No," said a voice from behind us. Robert Hawthorne stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 other board members. "You are this company. The board has called an emergency meeting. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation." Victor's face transformed through a spectrum of emotions: rage, disbelief, and finally, a terrible understanding. He looked at Hawthorne with naked betrayal. "You too, Robert, after everything I have on. Whatever you think you have is meaningless now." Hawthorne cut him off smoothly. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. The board's only concern now is saving what's left of this company." As the FBI led Victor toward the elevator, he suddenly stopped, turning back to scan the room one last time. His eyes were wild, desperate, those of a cornered animal. "It was you," he said. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at everyone and no one. "One of you insects did this. When I get out—" "Mr. Langston," the agent interrupted firmly. "It's time to go." The elevator doors closed on Victor Langston for the last time. The king of Ardent Dynamics, the man who'd ruled through fear and intimidation for nearly a decade, was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, Jennifer from HR. Then another joined, and another. Soon, the entire floor was applauding, some with tears in their eyes, others with grim satisfaction. Patricia approached me during the chaos, speaking quietly. The board wants to see you. All department heads, emergency meeting in 5 minutes. In the conference room where Victor had humiliated me 2 months ago, Hawthorne addressed the assembled leadership. We need stability, he said simply. The company is in crisis. Our stock is in freefall. Clients are calling to cancel contracts. We need leadership that can restore trust. His eyes found mine. Ms. Moore, the board was impressed by your department's performance despite recent challenges. We'd like you to serve as interim chief marketing officer, reporting directly to our emergency committee. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. This was the same room where Victor had called me nobody, where he'd tried to destroy me in front of everyone. I appreciate the board's confidence, I said, my voice carrying clearly. My first priority will be rebuilding trust, both internally with our teams and externally with our clients. We have good people here. They deserve leadership that values them. After the meeting, I returned to my office, my same corner cubicle. I wouldn't move to the executive suite. That kind of power display belonged to Victor's era, not mine. My phone buzzed with a message from Margaret in Phoenix. Watching the news, you did it. We all did it. Similar messages came from the others throughout the day. We'd won. The tyrant had fallen. That evening, as I prepared to leave, I found Patricia packing up her desk. 20 years, she said softly. 20 years of my life in this place. You could stay, I offered. The new leadership will need experienced people. She smiled sadly. No. I need to find out who I am without men like Victor defining my worth. But Rebecca, thank you for being brave enough to do what I never could. As I walked out of Ardent Dynamics that night, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected off wet streets, creating a shimmer of possibility. Victor Langston was finished, his assets frozen, his reputation destroyed, his freedom likely forfeit. But I felt no joy, no triumph, just a quiet satisfaction and bone-deep exhaustion. Justice isn't sweet. It's necessary. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room, but everything had changed. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by actual collaboration. The fear that had permeated every corner of Ardent Dynamics had evaporated like a bad dream. Victor Langston was serving 8 to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The trial had been swift. The evidence we'd compiled was so comprehensive that his lawyers advised him to take a plea deal. The mighty CEO who'd once terrorized hundreds of employees now wore an orange jumpsuit and worked in the prison laundry. I declined the permanent CMO position. The board was surprised when I submitted my resignation. But I knew my work at Ardent was complete. I wasn't meant to be another corporate executive climbing the traditional ladder. I'd learned that power wasn't about titles or corner offices. It was about standing up when everyone else was too afraid to rise. My team threw me a goodbye party. Sarah, who'd been promoted to department head, gave a speech that made me cry. Rebecca taught us that nobody is really nobody, she said. That every person has value, has power, has the ability to change things if they're brave enough to try. Thomas flew in from Seattle for the party. Jennifer brought champagne. Even Patricia came, looking 10 years younger and genuinely happy for the first time since I'd known her. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were survivors, bonded by our shared experience of standing up to tyranny. I started my own consulting firm specializing in corporate culture transformation and whistleblower protection. My first client was a company whose employees had reached out after reading about the Ardent Dynamics case. They had their own Victor Langston, and they needed help. This became my calling, not climbing corporate ladders, but helping others find their voice when powerful people try to silence them. My small Colorado town roots, which Victor had mocked, became my strength. I knew what it was like to be underestimated, dismissed, treated as insignificant. And I knew how to turn that perceived weakness into unassailable power. One morning, I received a letter forwarded from Ardent. It was from Victor, written on federal prison stationery. My first instinct was to throw it away unread, but curiosity won. Ms. Moore, it began, his handwriting still imperiously neat. I suppose congratulations are in order. You played the game better than I expected. I underestimated you, perhaps my only real mistake. But remember this, you became me to defeat me. You used manipulation, deception, and ruthlessness. Look in the mirror and ask yourself if you like what you see. We're not so different, you and I. I read it twice, then fed it into my shredder. He still didn't understand. I hadn't become him. I'd become something he could never be, someone who fought for others, not just myself. Every manipulation, every deception had been in service of justice, not ego. That was the difference between us. The one he'd never be able to comprehend from his prison cell. A year after that Friday morning, when the FBI walked into Ardent Dynamics, I was invited back to speak at their annual leadership conference. The company had recovered, stronger and more ethical than ever. The new CEO, recruited from outside, had implemented every reform we'd dreamed of during those secret meetings in Chinatown bars. Standing at the podium in that same conference room where Victor had tried to destroy me, I looked out at hundreds of faces, some familiar, many new. They were waiting to hear about courage, about standing up to power, about David versus Goliath. But that wasn't the lesson I'd come to share. The most dangerous lie we tell ourselves, I began, is that we're nobody, that we don't matter, that powerful people are untouchable. Victor Langston believed that lie about you, and it became his downfall. He saw nobodies where he should have seen human beings. He created enemies where he could have created allies. His greatest weakness wasn't his greed or his cruelty. It was his inability to recognize that every single person has inherent worth and potential power. I paused, making eye contact with as many people as I could. You are not nobody. You never were. And if someone tries to make you feel like you are, remember this story. Remember that a small-town woman with a community college vocabulary brought down a king, not through violence, not through becoming like him, but through the simple act of refusing to accept injustice. The applause that followed felt different from that morning when Victor was led away. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about transformation, healing, moving forward. As I walked out of Ardent Dynamics for the final time, the morning sun broke through the Chicago clouds, warming my face. I thought about that night 2 years ago when Victor had screamed at me, when he'd called me nothing, when he'd tried to erase my dignity in front of everyone. He'd thought he was putting me in my place. Instead, he'd freed me to find my real power. And in trying to crush one nobody, he'd created the very force that would destroy him. The elevator doors closed, and I smiled. Rebecca Moore from small-town Colorado had won. Not by becoming Victor Langston, but by remembering exactly who she was and knowing that was more than enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't becoming your enemy. It's showing them what they could never be, human. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and courage in the corporate world. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with revenge story lovers around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel for more tales of underdogs rising up against tyranny. And don't forget to share your thoughts. Have you ever faced your own Victor Langston? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire us all. Until next time, remember, you are never nobody.